Hey guys, Unfair here. Welcome back to another episode of Cutting Room Floor.
So now we're returning to Serif HQ, and now we have a conversation with Farida where she asks you how you feel about your augmentation and everything. But it's one thing that when we reached alpha with the critical path and everything playable, we kind of realized that there were not many interaction possibilities with some of the main characters, and therefore the personal touch, the emotional touch was kind of missing.
Well, and I think it was also like up until that point we kind of approached the writing of the dialogues. We were kind of approaching this from a cutscene mentality. We had a lot of cutscenes that would convey the main story. We had dialogues that would react to things that the player had done. So we would have these conversations with Serif, for instance, where he would say, you know, why did you kill them all? Why did you not? Etc., etc. But we hadn't actually looked at it from the standpoint of allowing the player to decide what he wanted Adam to say, unless it was, you know, do you want this weapon or that weapon? So when we reached the alpha phase, we started to realize, wait a minute, we need to bring more of that in. So we ended up doing a major overhaul of a lot of the scenes, and it enabled us to get this scene like with Farida, where suddenly she becomes a much more important character, and she's also bringing in a lot of the questions that we wanted to raise about augmentations.
Absolutely.
And how do you feel, to pull that player experience. So we were able to kind of succeed in many levels in allowing the player to choose how he wanted to be Adam and to get him to reflect more on his own experience with Adam. And I think this particular scene, it ended up resonating with a lot of different players for it as well. So what I love about this cutscene is the baseball. It was an element in the backstory of Serif's character, and it became such an important part of so much of the game itself.
And the way that the ball falls at some point and it reveals Adam Jensen in the back, it really shows that Adam Jensen is Sarah's puppet.
And what's funny is when we did the audition session, there was a monologue sort of scene, actually a dialogue with Mary playing the role of Megan, and Steve Shellen just sold it so much, speaking about augmented pictures using a baseball. So again, the baseball comes into play, and it really had a big part of him getting the role.
So here in Adam's office, you can see his computer. You can find emails on it, and as you can find emails all over the company of Serif. But in particular here, we start off a quest for Jensen to investigate these neuropazine thefts that are going on. And this was actually a mini quest that was kind of proposed by a level designer, the level designer who created this level. And he came to us and said he really wanted to have this really cool thing where you could kind of break into offices and find the codes to other people's offices, and it would be this whole mystery of kind of solving this, wrapping it up to the side quest of who's stealing the neuropazine. But his real intention was really just to give players a reason to get inside offices and steal things and find good codes for it. So he never really thought through the actual quest itself, and neither did really me or anyone else. And so when we actually sat down to start writing these emails, we just kind of had this thing as I'm going forward and I'm trying to build this whole mystery through this whole quest, and eventually as I'm getting to the end, I'm realizing there's no payoff.
Yeah, there's nothing.
And there's nothing, because we can't pay it off, because that's part of the side quest that comes later.
Yeah.
And we were doing it so late in the production process that we just kind of had no chance.
It was a bummer because a lot of players came to us after that because they were really into that quest and everything, and
Which
they were
led
asking us
nowhere.
like, how does it end? Like, where's the conclusion? And we're like,
The conclusion is when you steal from your office, it leads nowhere.
exactly.
Yeah.
There's the moral.
There's the moral. I steal
Crime doesn't
pixels
pay.
and polygons all
Or
the
it
time.
does.
I don't know what to do with them. I have no idea. I stack them up.
Stealing's bad, okay?
Yeah. So something that was really important, again, you're gonna hear this coming back over and over. It's this whole idea of like credibility to a lot of the stuff like Jeff mentions in another one of these beacons. The idea was not to make a sci-fi game. It was about to make an anticipation of the future, and in order to do this properly, a lot of the things need to look just like they look today, in a very precise way. And the storefronts for us were something very important These are the things sometimes that we miss the target in video games. They look like things that almost as if we've never walked in a real street before. We've never been into a store. You can see it's an abstraction almost of what storefronts look like. So that was pretty important. I mean, some of them are better than others, but
at the same time, that shows that the attention of detail that
yeah,
was
it's all
super
part of
important for the
Absolutely.
game. Not only in visuals, but in all the aspects of the game. But yeah,
no, that's very
that's
very
a prime
true.
example.
That's very true, and you can see not only can you see the product in those storefronts, and you can see what the brands are, but also the actual kind of design of these storefronts, the kind of like interesting kind of artsy thing that they have is something we work hard really on.
And in one of the things that we were saying, many times that we didn't necessarily fully care if people would recognize all those details, but as they would walk the streets, as they would go into the environments, they would absorb it in a natural fashion because that's how the real world is built, and therefore, even though they don't notice it consciously,
their subconscious are gonna pick up on it. It's actually if something is wrong, most of the time you actually notice it consciously. And if something is right, it's actually more your subconscious that registers it. So it's a lot easier to really affect the player that if you're wrong, then because that they really know pick it up right away. So you need to work pretty hard at that.
Yeah, the subway dancer.
Yeah, my favorite.
Me too.
Not me.
Actually, it looks like it's the prodigy singer that is kind of trying to look cool on stage.
Well,
that thing is one of the things I hate the most in the entire game.
And you know what I'm going to tell you is, I remember I had one of my guys on the team, Kevin Dion, was working on it, and I came in to see how it was going because like when I saw the animation, I wasn't all that excited because I'm like, well, this is going to be hard to kind of sell because I found on one the guy's dressed kind of like futuristic, but yet he's doing these bad '80s moves.
But he's not even dressed futuristic.
Well, he's wearing like shorts.
I don't even know where that kid comes
The point being is that he's doing '80s moves, but he's not dressed as an '80s guy.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it was kind of like, well, what do we do? And when I walked in, Kevin had sort of gone with that '80s kind of, like a boom box, like boom,
Yeah.
and it just didn't work. Like I'm looking at it, and I'm like, man, this is just it's emphasizing everything that's wrong with it. And I said, you know what it needs? And I was just, and he shares a booth with Johan, and I said, and I was talking out loud, I said, this needs some messed up track that like makes no sense, is just chaos.
I agree.
I said, so that the guy just looks like some idiot going nuts to some stupid music.
That's a very good point because that's the thing in video games when you want to do something that's like when you want to represent something that's extremely cultural, like culturally based, like hip hop or breakdance or anything like that. It's just so. These things are so precise, you know what I mean? So you're right, to have turned it into a really kind of weird, chaotic, that would have been a great solution.
Well, that's what we did. To end it quickly is that the other engineer in the room goes, well, I have this piece of music that I did with this drummer friend of his. And he called the guy up. He played it for me, and I said, that's perfect. That's what I want.
Well, you did it with the track, but the dance is still like...
No, I couldn't change the animation.
I know.
But I needed to get a music that tried to make it look like we're trying to make this look crazy as opposed to...
I think one of the key aspects is that if for it to really work in the themes of the game, it should have been kind of this augmented kind of
I agree.
Free.
Where
Totally.
he's dancing and using his augmentations in a very uncanny way.
agree completely.
And
That was the
awesome.
power of our game, and we didn't use it, And as far as just real hip hop culture, like there's one game that did it really really well with the breakdancing in the Metro. It's the Darkness, the first Darkness in the Metro. But to do this, like you really need to know what you're quote unquote talking about.
Too.
Yeah.
But the last thing I'll say is that's the fun thing, and sometimes not so fun thing about being in audio is that it arrives at your desk and it's finished, and you're looking at it going, what am I going to do with this? Because if I just do the bare minimum of making it functional, it's going to fall flat because it's already half failing.
Right.
So and at that point, we're all partying.
Everybody's moved on to other things, which I understand, but it usually falls to us to try and find a way to spin it and make it at least feel a bit better. And for me, I was happy with where we ended up with it, considering the state it kind of came to me at. I figured, we did a pretty good compromise.
So here's a billboard with Eliza on it, and that's pretty cool because one thing that we really wanted to do with Eliza, she was a bit of our poster child in the game for the cyber renaissance fashion. Like they really push one because she's a personality. She's probably rich. She's on TV all the time, and these are the people usually that are kind of like at the forefront of fashion and whatnot, and all those trends. Things is that we could only afford one model for Eliza in the game, not because of memory, but because of time constraints and whatnot. So we had this idea that if we only have one model, then what we could do, because she's a personality, there's got to be ads and posters and marketing and stuff like that of her in the world. So why don't we portray some of her other costumes or clothes or whatnot through these things instead of making other models, and that ended up working really well. And we also had to make sure that these things were positioned in almost like a choke point, so that the players,
it attracts your attention.
It attracts your attention, and players would see them and whatnot. So I think it was really clever that we came up with that idea. It was it made us save a lot of time and money, but it ended up giving the exact same result.
It worked. She attracted attention.
Awesome. So the name of the gas station is something that I came up with while we're designing the textures. The name Oran is actually one of the provinces of Nigeria, which is a country that is totally being decimated by Exxon with all the oil exploitation, and they were making sure that it's a puppet government that's in place, that's the education, the population kind of got educated and stuff like that to make sure that they'll never really rebel against the exploitation that the U.S. and Exxon is doing there. But anyway, I suggest that you go research this. It's really interesting, and here's just a little snippet of information that we decided to, let's take some of what's going on there and somehow put it in the game.
So here's the weapon merchant inside of the gas station, and the whole gas station was a very old building that we kept from all the way back from the very first vertical slice. And instead of trying to redesign it as we went along in the production of the whole city hub, we actually tried to keep it because we thought it was one of the very cool things visually, and also gameplay wise there was a lot of potentials to do with it, and we always wanted to have a weapon merchant, a black market merchant inside of it. And the thing is, for us, since you work on a game, it's always you lose some kind of objectivity about what you think is good about your game. So for me, it was very obvious that there was someone in there. But from the playtests, almost every single playtesters did not see the weapon merchant. So.
But we were debating like, should it be obvious or should it be hidden, and etc. And we went back and forth a couple of times until we decided, okay, let's make it more.
At some point, we had an icon about those guys and trying to create some kind of a Metal Gear Solid-ish type of group or something like that. And at the end, we said, fuck it.
So, John, you managed to do promotion for your girlfriend back in the day.
So there's something like that. There's a lot of the posters in Detroit City. My girlfriend at the time, my ex-girlfriend actually was studying for her master's in industrial design, and there was all sorts of events that they had to prepare for, and they had to do posters to promote. And because we wanted to have a lot of realism and credibility, the ads or logos or whatever, all the way down to posters and magazines in the game. One night I was just trying to design posters, and I was at home, my apartment, and as I was designing this poster, I started looking around my house, and there's all these already made, really nice posters made by real designers, real graphic artists, real industrial designers, studying at the master's level. So it's like, shit.
Wait a minute.
I was like, what the hell? I'm just going to take that down, and I remember not even telling her. She ended up finding out later. But so a lot of them in Detroit are, it's actually her work, yeah.
So this is the basketball. It's the
famous basketball court.
The famous basketball court.
My favorite.
It's an homage to the original Deus Ex, but for us it was not necessarily something that we would do by default. Like we didn't have the physics for that. We didn't have like all the things we needed. And on top of that, some people in the team, they were like, why spending time doing this?
Yeah, what's the point?
What's the point? And that's the thing. One of our writer, Taras Taziuk, was coming to me like almost every single day. I want the basketball in there. I want the basketball
And
in
he
there.
came to me. He came to me too, and I said, we got the baseball in for Seraph, so hush."
And then eventually with T-Bone, I managed to push him to create the ball, and then.
And the thing is, I'm actually the one who wanted with my level artist to actually make sure we have a freaking basketball in there, not the whole core, but just the basketball hoop, and even the ball was not sure, but at least just the hoop itself to have that clin d'oeil, that just little tease from Deus Ex 1, and but the physics on the ball, man, it created nightmares on programmer side, and they really hated me on this. But, yeah.
But we fought. You fought.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's just a small example for things that seem very mundane in the game. Sometimes it's a big challenge, or you have to mobilize a lot of people to make this happen.
Especially when it was possible to do it in 1999.
Especially, as crazy as it sounds. Yeah, so I don't know why, but I really like this character, this side quest character. He always felt really credible to me, the way he speaks and everything, and all the things he's talking about makes the conspiracy feel even bigger than what you're actually playing in the main story. Like, it's kind of hinting at the shadow government and stuff like that, and I think it makes it much deeper than.
And I think a lot of credit for that goes to not just the guys who wrote the dialogue, but the actor. We mentioned him earlier, and the casting of the side quest characters was an interesting part of what we were doing, right, Steve?
Yeah, it was great. We had and we'll even throw some, since we're giving credit out, we'll throw some to our voice director, Simon Peacock, who did a great job. And he often would recommend some of these characters to us when we would give him the character design, and he'd be like, "Oh, I know this one guy would probably nail it." And more often than not, he was right on. But I agree with what you're saying, Jeff. Like, he's one of my favorite characters, because when I saw the visual of what the character looked like, because it was one of those guys that we casted without knowing what he would look like, the voice, it was one of those rare occasions where the voice and the visual matched perfectly. And when you played it, I think that's part of the reason why it feels so credible, is that the voice looks like it would come from that character.
So I guess we have quite a few things to mention about the apartment layouts. It's quite a bit harder than it seems, even though, apartments are quite common. But something I remember at the beginning is with Frank, like, we sat down, me and Frank McCann, in the sense that like, just getting down like a volume that feels like natural, that feels like a real apartment, like, even though we've all lived in them and whatnot, is actually not as easy as it sounds. So at first we had like, art design and level designs that they felt a bit awkward in terms of feeling like we were in an apartment. But I think it ended up quite well. Like, we fixed it.
Also, we had the
good
challenge of the cover system that we needed to make everywhere like cover friendly.
That was a big part as well, why they probably felt a bit weird at first, because they accommodated for that,
And a big challenge as well in regards to the apartment is that originally we had 2 models, and we actually cutted the larger one, which added a lot more gameplay options to the players.
Forgot about that.
Like, for the first one, when the Greg Thorpe apartment was a really large one, very gameplay focused. But actually, we changed it because we had way too much stuff to actually place inside of those apartments, so we kept the more regular type of environment. And the thing is also during the production, it was add support from Level Art to actually add props and do some pass on those apartments. So until very late in production, it was all propsing by myself. So chairs, tables, and all that stuff. And each apartment I wanted to have a specific thematic. And I had almost no support on Level Art, even though we had paintovers from
But whatever. You're right. Those were things that happened. But I think you ended up managing it pretty well. But one thing, speaking of props in the apartments, one thing that I can't stand is there's the Icarus paintings and the and it's like the Icarus myth is just like an analogy in the thing, right? And the way that these paintings was probably just for one lab or something, and ended up being like everybody in the game just buys paintings of Icarus. I was like, wow,
Well, now we're with Patrick Garon, which was our technical level designer on the project, and for this moment what we want to talk about is the fact that we wanted to have some events in the game where they were not necessarily side quests per se, but they were events in which your morality could be affected if someone is attacked or something like that, and you could intervene and with consequences. But it didn't happen, right?
Yeah, to do Squid event in Deus Ex, it was hard. Like we had lots of good ideas, and we had two major limitations. It's like the first one I can think of is the engine, but also production-wise. And the engine was allowing us to put animation, but to be able to synchronize like NPC together, to manage the interruption and all that was not something that was simple to do with our engine. So lots of the ideas were cut because of that. And when we were able to do them, it became like a problem of production, because to create a very simple situation, with the Deus Ex game, you don't have a choice but to ask you what happened if the player do that, or the player can do so many different
the
ways.
chaos and all that,
Yeah.
you know. And
He has augmentation that he can go and sneak, can be like invisible, so we will not interrupt. Someone will disappear. What do we do? What does he say? He start to talk to a guy before the event, after the event.
It's very complex.
So it becomes a very something simple become very complex. So we always ask ourselves, what if? And for our game, when we want to create quality, so we will ask, will the player will be happy with the result? And we spend most of that time doing the side quests instead, because there will be a good story that will be developed, and those encounters we decided to cut them or to change the scope and to something very simple.
So this is a corner of the street where there are several prostitutes, and I can't remember what were their name, working girls?
Working
or
girls,
something?
yes.
And one of them is called Charlotte, and actually it's a
The only prostitute in the game with
that
a
has
name.
a name, exactly, and it refers to Charlotte the Harlot on the first Iron Maiden album. And actually, even though I'm the biggest Iron Maiden fan in the team, it was not coming from me. Actually, it's one of the programmers that came to me with that idea. And we were late in the development. Everybody were tired. Everybody were over their heads. And I was like, gosh, it's so exciting, and it would be nice. And I said, okay, I'll take my courage, and I'll go see Frank McCann with that. And I asked, can we change the name of a character like that and for Charlotte? And Frank looks at me super seriously like, why? Yeah, but you know, it's
But he
kind of
always
a-
looks super serious.
Yeah,
That's funny.
Frank looks serious.
Very funny guy. I don't know why you're saying that.
And he looks at me very seriously like, why the hell do you want me to do that kind of attitude? And I said, yeah, it's a kind of a homage to Iron Maiden. And since Frank used to like Iron Maiden quite
Used
a bit,
to?
or
Oh,
still, or still, he was very sensitive to my case, and he took 5 minutes to do it.
And I promise that there'll be no reference to Iron Maiden in our next game.
Alexander.
So here's Adam Jensen's apartment building. What is it called, Mary? Again?
I believe it's the Chiron building.
The Karen building. I used to say Chiron, but yeah, it's Karen. A lot of people have asked us, how come there's like such a really nice kind of posh-looking building in the middle of the prostitute district and a gang district and whatnot. It's like you're in this really nice place and then you walk out and right away there's people that they want to sell you drugs or whatnot. The idea was at the beginning of the project we wanted to have a really nice, rich neighborhood in Detroit where a lot of these kind of cyber renaissance, new age buildings would be at. This is where Adam would live, and obviously it's David Sarif who's paying for this apartment, because if you look at Adam's personality, it's probably not the kind of
No,
place
it's
he
not
would
at all
live
the
in.
place he would live in.
Exactly. But we ended up realizing that we couldn't do this entire neighborhood, but we wanted to keep the nice building for Adam, and probably after some talks with the level designers as well, we figured out this was the best place to put it at. So yeah, thematically there's a bit of a clash, but some it's part of the concessions we have to do sometimes.
Welcome home, Mr. Jensen.
So Adam's apartment is one of I think the most intricate, kind of interesting places in the game. During the production, we actually called it the Adams Museum, and the whole idea is because that's what we wanted it to be. We wanted people to just walk through it and just by observing, just through all the show don't tell, to get a lot of information on Adam's background and Adam's personality and what's happened to him in the past, and also show that he likes cereals a lot. And also, there's a secret stash behind the TV, which is a bit of an homage to the first Deus Ex, which was I think in Paul's apartment, where you had all the secret stuff with the computers behind the shelves and whatnot. And also, Mary does all this stuff on the
there's all this stuff on the workbench, because we had written in his backstory this big long thing about how he's always been a collector. He used to go to old secondhand stores and stuff and find old mechanical objects that he liked to take apart, and because he was curious and he was very into that. And so we pulled that out, and what was interesting about it is we didn't actually tell the story of his backstory, but people who came and saw that workbench then made up their own stories and basically wrote to us and were saying things like, wow, it's so cool. It's like how he's trying to understand his own body and his new mechanics. And I was like, oh, I like that backstory a lot better than what I came up with. So yeah, that's what we're going with.
But actually, it was that too. This room was supposed to give you all the personality of Adam Jensen through his environment. So.
So one thing that we really wanted is to show some kind of quirky side to Adam's personality, and a good idea I think that we had was to show that he really likes to eat cereal. Sugar cereal, absolutely, kid cereals, which are also the ones that I like. And so we designed 3 boxes. It's Manuel, our storyboard artist, who's he's worked in animation for the longest time. He's an amazing artist in terms of doing cartoons, and he designed all these 3 boxes, and it turned out amazingly
They're
well.
amazing,
yeah, they're insane, and also just the jokes that he put on them. And you see that there's bowls lying around in Adam's apartment of like unfinished cereal bowls and all that kind of stuff. And it really hit well with the fans, because there's a lot of fan art of Adam Jensen with his
cereal boxes.
he's in a grocery store with his cart, and he's just like debating, does he get the Augment Chews or the Crunchy Pirates or whatever. So people really got into the whole thing.
And the Augment Chews are declined from the Jonah Chew, Jeff Chew.
Yeah, all the chew things
All the
that
chew.
if you follow us on Twitter, we all have that. But that, I guess, my conclusion to all this is, when you design a game, don't underestimate details, and don't underestimate how much you push the quality of things that seem to be so, trivial, because this is what actually gives life. Not the only thing, but it's something that can
Those
actually
details,
give a lot of life to a game. So here we can see all these cards that Adam received while he was in convalescence from his operation. You had to stay home probably for quite a while, and these are the cards that people sent him to get better, to get well cards, and it shows the amount of details that we wanted to put in the game, and again the show don't tell, and to have a lot of the universe live through just little things like this that you could see.
And the fact that they're still on his desk shows that it was not a long time ago. Like he was somewhat rushed out of.
Yeah. Or that he just never cleans, but
One or the other.
And then there's the cracked mirror, Mary. Right?
Yeah, and the cracked mirror in his bathroom is a big part of it too. I think that we are always saying, even before we knew if we could have mirrors in it, we were saying we absolutely have to have a mirror in his bedroom, and he has to have cracked it. And it shows a lot about what he's been going through, and it did help us cover some of the technical limitations that we had in the game, I believe.
Yeah, because we decided we wouldn't have reflective mirrors for whatever reason.
And and for some reason, like this kind of psychological reflection of his anger toward what happened to him, like, really resonated with the fans, and I think it made them empathize even more with the character.
And like I said, because technically we couldn't do actual mirrors throughout the whole game, so we kind of roll ball on it and have fun through the emails between him and the assistant.
Yeah, that's true.
Down in the lobby and all. So.
It became a bigger story. That cutscene actually, in the first iteration, in the first build of this map, it was a first-person cutscene in which you were seeing the computer through the eyes of Adam Jensen, and you would see everything that Pritchard was finding and everything. But it was very static. It was lacking the drama, and then our cinematic director really wanted to do it differently with a third-person approach, where we see Adam Jensen interacting with Pritchard and everything. And in the end, I think it's much more dramatic and much more interesting, more dynamic than what we had in the first place.
Yeah.
So he wasn't working alone.